My name is Karen Peaks, and I have been asked to be a part of the Peterborough Players series of actors and directors and lovely people reading chapters from the book about the Peterborough Players and its founding and what it all means. And I was honored to be asked to read a chapter called The Formative Years, which I think is especially appropriate for me because my formative years as a person and as a performer and just a general artist within the theater community took place at the Peterborough Players. I was an intern there in 1998, I believe, and I was so young and just learned everything. I mean, I just learned how to do every aspect of theater, and I don't remember all of it, but it just helped to create a well-rounded understanding of what it means to be a professional in the theater. And I made such wonderful friends, and the energy of the theater and the barn and everything about it is magical, and it's a place like no other. And I feel so blessed to have had it in my life for as long as I did. I went back for many summers, and last time I was there was 2015. So hopefully I'll be back again at some point. You never know what the future holds. So with that being said, I will get started with the formative years. It starts with a quote by Alfred Kremborg. "Don't worry about the depression. If we all work very simply and faithfully, the best results will follow." He was right. Like many historic events, the founding of our playhouse was the result of many influences, some easily recognized and explained, others more mysterious. And while we know that the decision to establish a theater in her barn was definitely EBS's, Edith Bond Stearns, we will probably never know with assurance all of the reasons and in what measure they combined to bring forth in her the will and energy to take on the project that it would become. Granted, what happened that first summer in 1933 bore little resemblance to the professional theater company and dramatic workshop that would soon follow, but the first season was also much more than just entertainment for family and close friends. So, who were the individuals who influenced and encouraged EBS in her endeavor? The most obvious would have been her friends and acquaintances in the Peterborough artistic community. Emile Bellevaux was often a house guest of EBS, and it was he who probably introduced her to Alfred Kremborg, a noted playwright in residence at the MacDowell Colony. Kremborg may have encouraged her to perform one of his recently penned rhythmic verse dramas in her barn, or more plausibly, it was EBS who sold him on the idea. In any event, Kremborg, like Bellevaux, would become a co-founder of the Players, and his works would become a mainstay in the first 3 seasons. Marie Curie herself must also be considered an influence in the establishment of our playhouse. She and EBS were friends who shared a common love of the theater. Marie, a recent widow, who had founded and continued to direct Mary Arden, would have been a wonderful confidant for EBS if she were seeking advice on starting her own theater. And of course, there was Marian MacDowell. She was the leading lady of the Peterborough arts community, much respected and admired by all who knew her. It was Mrs. MacDowell and the colony to whom EBS was introduced a decade earlier on her first trip to the area, and she was to become a close friend of EBS. Residents of the MacDowell colony comprised the majority of the small audience that attended the first play of June of 1933, and would remain so during the formative years of the theater. And colonists like Alfred Kremborg, Saul Cohen, and others would contribute significantly to the repertoire of those first seasons. Additionally, some have suggested that EBS's daughter Ibby, then 20 years old, was also a factor, having been inspired by her own growing interest in theater and visits to the MacDowell Colony and Mary Arden, to the point that she was lobbying her mother for permission to perform in plays. While EBS admired the theater tremendously, she dreaded to have her children embark upon careers that might lead them among associates she considered potentially undesirable. In a later interview, she would recall, Somewhere I knew there were other fine, cultured young people ambitious to learn the honorable profession of acting who would meet my children on their own social level. This desire for her children to be exposed to the dramatic arts within an environment aligned with her values was another factor in starting her own theater. Others have suggested that EBS and her mother, Isabella Bond, even before the purchase of the farm, had intended to create a theater on property somewhere in the Peterborough area, their motive ostensibly being to provide employment opportunities for Broadway casualties of the Depression, which I think is great. No doubt, many of these factors, and perhaps others, contributed in different ways to EBS's desire to create our playhouse. However, the single most important factor was her desire to present dramas and to encourage the young playwright of the future, as she explained in her original charter for the theater. The commitment to bring this concept to light reveals personal qualities that were a reflection of her parents' values and aspirations, her education, and her upbringing in a household and social stratum that revered the arts. Edith Bond Stearns was born Edith Louise Bond on February 14, 1884, in Cliftondale, Massachusetts, to Charles Henry and Isabella Bacon Bond. Charles Bond, who started a cigar company, would later sell his interest in the business, earning a substantial profit that would become the basis of the family fortune. Until his death in 1908, he devoted most of his non-business attention to the development of educational opportunities for underprivileged youth and became a well-known patron of the arts. Johnny Stearns recalled the story of an 11-year-old grocer's daughter who had a lovely singing voice. Bond financed her education and training, and she became known as Geraldine Farrar, an important American opera singer. Charles Bond built what was later to be the Shubert Theater in Boston, but he died shortly before its opening. In his will, he endowed a trust, the Bond Fund, that continues to this day to provide annual scholarship funds to promising young artists. Isabella Belle Bacon Bond, Charles's second wife, was a Boston lady with a strong interest in theater and a convert to Christian Science after a long study of Mary Baker Eddy's Science and Health. A well-known devotee of the arts and a staunch advocate for the less fortunate in society, she spent 21 years of her life promoting her dearest activity, the Boston Music School of Settlement, instituted to bring education in music to the poorest child. She was president of the organization for 12 of those years. EBS was educated at Dana Hall and Wilbraham Academy and studied at Radcliffe College and Boston University. As a young woman, she was also active in the Little Theater Group in Boston, where she first met Marie Glass, later to become Marie Currier of Mary Arden. EBS appeared in a production of the Noel Coward play Fallen Angels and recruited a shy, handsome young man named Arthur Fiedler, then a little-known violinist from the Boston Orchestra, to perform the role of an attractive Frenchman in the show. They became lifelong friends, and long after achieving renown as the leader of the Boston Pops, he would travel to Peterborough to see EBS and attend the players' performances. EBS met her husband, Frederick Hugo Stearns, referred to as Gale, while working at a settlement house in the North End. Stearns, a former news correspondent in the Balkans and an impressionist painter, was 15 years her senior. Gale and EBS's first child, Isabel, Ibby Stearns, arrived in February of 1913. They moved back into the Commonwealth Avenue house with Isabella temporarily after they lost everything in a fire. Their mother set them up in a house on Massachusetts Avenue across the river in Cambridge. It was there that their second child, Sally, was born. Another move took them to a farm that Belle had acquired in Billerica, where Johnny Stearns, the third and last of EBS's children, was born in 1916. Eventually, Gale abandoned his family and disappeared in 1923, after which the now officially divorced EBS and her children moved back into the Bond house on Commonwealth Avenue. There is a family legend that Isabella Bond paid Gale to stay away from EBS and her children. To this day, some of his art hangs in the old farmhouse at Stearns Farm. The story goes that EBS had strategically placed one of his paintings, a self-portrait, so that it could easily be covered by propping open a nearby door. This was the background of the woman who founded what would become the Peterborough Players. But the background doesn't show us the living person. For that, we can only go to those who knew her best. Her daughter, Ibby, recalled her as a small woman, about 5'1", with snapping brown eyes. She couldn't talk without using her hands, she said. Highly intuitive, sensitive to moods, her mother recognized people's talents even when they didn't, Ibby said. The dining room table in the farmhouse was the center of life, Ibby added. We talked and talked and talked. She would get tired and go up to bed, but not wanting to stop things, she would post Sally or me in the dining room to run and tell her if anything happened. Then about 12 or 1 in the morning, she'd get her second wind and get up to perform again. She was not unworldly, said Bob Brown, who married her daughter Sally. She had her points of naivete, but hers was a shrewd naivete. Perhaps the most telling comment came from her daughter Sally, who took over as managing director of the Peterborough Players when EBS died in 1961. In a 1983 article in Yankee magazine, Sally said, "She was so enthusiastic that if anyone talked to Mother for 15 minutes, he or she would feel underprivileged not to work here. She backed people up, had faith in them. When somebody has that sort of faith in you, it makes you feel you have to live up to it." That may have been the crucial ingredient. One evening in the late spring of 1933, when EBS sat down after dinner with Emile Bellevaux, Alfred Kremborg, and Marion McDowell and revealed her dream. Ibby remembers her mother saying to Kremborg, "You've written such beautiful plays, and Emile is a wonderful director. Why don't we do some of your plays this summer?" The theater's first play, Mannequin and Minnikin, opened on the evening of June 18th, 1933. Bellevaux directed and starred as Mannequin, and Ibby played the role of Minnikin. Saul Cohen provided musical accompaniment on the mandolute, a North African instrument resembling an oud, and Johnny and Sally were in charge of the lighting, which consisted of candelabra and kerosene lanterns for that first season. In the audience that night were 18 or 20 MacDowell colonists, including poet Francis Frost, drama critic Carl Carmer, New York producer and Mariarden director Howard Inches, Madame Liska, formerly of the Paris Opera, and one Anzia Yezlyrska, a Russian writer. Ruth St. Denis, the famous dancer performing that summer at Mariarden, rounded out the list of more prominent audience members. All of them watched the performance sitting on a motley collection of dining chairs, overstuffed armchairs and sofas dragged into the barn from the house. Madame Liska later wrote to EBS, "I am sure your theater has a great future because the atmosphere is already there. By that I mean everything is prepared so that art can happen. In so many places, the artist loses half his energy trying to create a setting." All of the plays that first season were attended by friends and family, so of course there was no charge for admission. Despite mixed reviews, EBS and her coterie of family and friends chose to see the first season as a resounding success. Our Playhouse, as EBS had dubbed it, continued to rely on Alfred Kremborg and his artistic direction, as well as Bellevaux's directing and acting skills in the 1934 season. An old Delco lighting system had been procured to replace the kerosene lanterns, the box office barn stacked full of the batteries that powered the system. Johnny Stearns recalled, "We would charge the batteries up all day before a performance and hope to God they would last for the performance." The candelabra remained for a rustic lighting effect, just as they do to this day. And don't we all love those candelabra? Another change to the theater in that second season of 1934 was the initiation of an apprentice program. It's not surprising that a student training program was established almost immediately after the founding, and over the years it became a focal point of its identity. In addition to creating a theatrical haven for her own children, one of EBS's original goals for the theater was to encourage other aspiring young actors, like myself, To quote the program's philosophical raison d'être, we believe in a reasonable degree of theoretical knowledge, but we feel that supervised practical experience is far more essential. I couldn't agree more. Tuition for the program was $200, with board and room provided at nearby farmhouses or in town for $12 per week. In addition to the daily theatrical curriculum, apprentices were to assist in 3 major productions and produce their own workshop productions at the end of the season. Most of the 12 to 15 apprentices in those early seasons stayed at Kendall Hall School or the Manse House, and later in various private homes and in cabins built on the grounds at Stearns Farm. The second season opened on July 21st, 1934, and featured 3 more one-act poetic dramas under the direction of Bellevaux. According to a review from the transcript, the performance was attended by large audiences comprising many persons prominent in art and social circles. An article that appeared in the opening night edition of the transcript previewing the 1934 season lends further insight to the artistic philosophy of the theater during its early years. The staff and company of our Playhouse have been increasingly pleased by the response that has already met their efforts at establishing a company devoted to the poetic theater. Our Playhouse seeks to coordinate the 3 major arts of the theater, drama, dance, and music, thereby allowing for endless experimentation and development. Neither EBS nor her daughter Sally afterwards, for the entire 49 years they operated the theater, ever received 1 penny of personal income for the operations. It was their strong belief that it would reflect poorly on both of them and the theater if the community saw them profit from the endeavor, particularly with the advent of accepting monetary contributions from patrons and sponsors. So in 2 short years, our Playhouse grew from a homemade stage in a barn into a going summer stock company and drama school. True, the performances were still being done for a limited audience, consisting mostly of the McDowell colonists, friends in the region, and summer season residents. And although the plays were being reviewed favorably in the local newspaper, very few, if any, of the townspeople had embraced the idea of the theater, much less attended any shows. Though the unique theatrical program of verse plays appealed greatly to the sophisticated tastes of EBS's acquaintances from the arts colonies and her social circle, time would soon reveal its limitations in pursuing her vision. This situation would lead EBS to make substantial changes in the theater, and for the first time, in literature promoting the 1935 season, the company referred to itself as the Peterborough Players. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Peterborough Players, for everything, for all you do and continue to do.